No, that's work. Ah, there's Twitch. Looks like we're streaming. I'll go tell the world. Streaming. Indie dev. Ooh, that's not how you spell it. Indie dev doing underwater stuff. And talking about spaceships and stuff. Post. And then again, here. Excuse me. I'm steadily sipping on some soda to try and keep awake, and so hopefully you won't be hearing me burp too much, but I guess that's what happens. I guess that I've always talked about the fact that, whenever you start streaming, something stupid starts happening, like you always get the hiccups or you always burp or whatever it is. And I guess the people that always burp probably just drink soda. I don't drink that much, or I didn't drink that much until recently. So I went ahead and did some optimization off camera. It turns out that the only things that were taking up any time at all were some of my particle effects, because I was updating every particle every frame in some really complicated ways. So this is the old version of the seaweed, and I've turned off a lot of the animations because they were what were slowing things down. But it's been a year or so, and I've learned a lot more. So here's the new seaweed, which is basically the same thing, but is all shader animated, so it's basically free. The only thing I have to do is add in some push mechanics, which I'll do later if I feel like it. But really, the kelp is so thick that when you move through it, it doesn't really feel. I mean, it should probably push, but it doesn't really feel as awful as it might otherwise. So we might create, just to warm up, let's go ahead and create a kelp gun, a kelp firing weapon, so that we can replace our existing kelp with our new kelp. The difference between the two is that one is a particle effect and one is not. One of the issues about this is kind of interesting. You can't mark these as static, or you can, but it actually makes them render slower. And that's because they are GPU instanced materials. And I'm always of the opinion that if you have a shader like this, these things never have to actually move, so they should be static. But when you mark something as static, Unity specifically looks for it to do batching, static batching, which is like GPU instancing but shittier. So I'm hoping that I can keep these pretty close to free, but the truth is I could make them particles again if it turns out to be pretty slow, and I could actually make them into particles even after I make them into meshes, so it's not a big deal if I redo it now, because I won't have to keep redoing it. I can just do a conversion between the two pretty easily. These new boxes that you see, I actually just lit up some of the existing boxes there for loading sets and stuff. So we need to find a mesh cannon, and we also need to save a seaweed. So up here in prefabs, create folder flora. Now the real question is, when I create a prefab that is what do you want to call it? Coral. I haven't really had any caffeine yet, just the first sip of soda. When I create coral, what's going to happen? Because am I going to mark it as flora, or am I going to mark it as fauna? Very complicated thoughts, I'm sure you'll agree. So we're going to delete this seaweed batch. We don't need it. And we're also going to shut down 2 of the rooms, because rendering all of them at once is what slows everything down. And now we're going to look for a mesh cannon. Let's see whether I've got a mesh cannon here in prefabs. No, I guess we'll just create a new one. I want to make sure that it's something I can create easily anyway, right? So we're going to go ahead and create seaweed cannon mesh. And then we'll add the component, which will be a mesh. Wow, I didn't call it a mesh. Did I call it a cannon? Fish cannon, gloop cannon, height map scanner, particle cannon. I actually don't remember what I called this script. Let's take a look. Here's our scripts. Here's our level design scripts. Detail spray. I called it a detail spray. There we go. So here's our detail spray, and you can see that we can specify prefabs so that we can just drop seaweed in there. And if we come up with multiple kinds of seaweed, we could deal with that too. And here you can see the scale curve, which goes from 1 to 3. That's definitely not suitable for our seaweed, just because our seaweed is huge. So we're actually going to go ahead. Actually, that's probably just about right. So we're just going to leave it like that for now. We do want to randomize the rotation, but only on one axis, and I'm not 100% sure whether or not that's the right axis. We will find out soon. But there's another thing that I wanted to do. Where is it? It's down there. So let's move it up here. The other thing I wanted to do is make it so I can see the cannons when they're not selected. Because when they're selected, you can see them quite clearly. But when they're not selected, you can't see them, which means you have to keep searching for them, and it's just a pain in the ass. So what we're going to do is we're going to open up detail spray and wait 15 or 20 minutes, because that's how long it takes for the thing to boot, IDE. I guess we'll start to do some editing while we wait. We should just be able to... There we go, local. Yup. Yup. Rip. And let's go ahead and change... Oh, we can't change the color. Well, we're definitely going to want to add in a color, too. It's going to take a while for it to catch up to that, so we're going to just go ahead and scroll on down. Here's our Undraw Gizmos selected. That only happens when we've got it selected, hence the name. Oh, the sun is immediately shining in my face. So we're going to just do the exact same basic setup, but a much more reduced version. Void Undraw Gizmos. And basically the only thing in this Undraw Gizmos, it hasn't actually finished opening yet, this IDE. It's going to do it in any second here. There we are. So what we're going to do is we are going to have this same basic setup. This here is not necessary. I've been doing it for a while because it was in the example. But all you have to do is reset the gizmos matrix to... I'm not even resetting it here, see? So we're just going to go ahead and tidy this up while I'm here. There we are. Just set it back to identity. So that nobody gets surprised later on in the line. But I'm not actually sure that that is necessary. I have a strange feeling that it's not. Did I really name it with a... I guess I did. It's fine. So we're going to just grab this stuff, put it down here. But none of these are what we want. We're going to be replacing those with a draw cube. And what we're going to do is we're going to draw a cube above where our... basically at the back of our cannon. So to do that, we're going to do vector3.forward, negative vector3.forward, and then the size is going to be new vector3, and we're just going to give it an x and a y and no z. So it'll be like 0.5, 0.5. I guess these have to be f's. And then 0.05. There we are. But we're going to want to make sure this color is not, in fact, the UI color. So color C equals UI color. And then C.A equals 0.1F. Because we don't want it to be opaque. And then the rest of these are gone. So the idea here is that we'll be able to see it when it's not selected. We should see some of them pop up in the background here. I think I saw a few, but I don't see any now. Yeah, okay, they're just really hard to see because 0.1 is too faint. Let's make it 0.4. Now let's go ahead and do something that identifies them as a cannon after all. So we are, in fact, going to keep some of these. I'm just not sure which ones. So the line is the forward line, and that might be the only one we want to keep. Basically, I don't want them to look like they're just floating tiles in the sky. I want them to be cannons. That's probably enough for me to remember that they're cannons. It's not that important to be perfect about it. And then when you click on them, they just happen. But here's the thing. Once you click on them, you get that plus the rest of the art. I really wish that onDraw gizmos didn't fire when you had an onDraw gizmos created. It just seems strange to have them both, doesn't it? Anyway, let's go ahead and see what we got. So that's way, way too big. The problem here is that the seaweed cannon is not currently within an object, which means that these will get sprayed into the base room. We're going to go ahead and create an object. We don't want the object to have any rotation or scaling, because that'll be miserable. There we go. And drop the cannon in there, and we'll just call this seaweed. And we should just be able to fire the seaweed, and it'll create it. I just don't want to do it in the wrong spot because it'll be annoying. Not terribly annoying, just a little bit annoying. So right now we're kind of firing 5. We're going to up that considerably. Fire! Okay, so the random rotation rotates it randomly on every axis, which is clearly not what we want. What we want is for it to rotate randomly on just the z-axis. So we're going to have another randomization here. The stagger z, let's just check and see what it does. Okay, that just moves it up a little bit, so we don't want that. But we do want this randomized rotation, so public bool randomize spin equals true. There we go. So when we do the randomized rotation, there it is. It's going to be vector3.up. This is local, I think. If it's not, we'll know pretty soon here. I'm not actually sure whether that's the right axis. There's a lot of things that could go wrong because I didn't bother to check anything, but we'll go ahead and just try it. Chow. Yeah, that's obviously incorrect. It could also be that it's not local. It might be a global space thing, which would be a little bit strange, because that would mean that when I wasn't rotating, I was setting it to 0 rotation, which isn't generally what I want. Okay, so that is also weird. It must just be global. That's very strange. I didn't think it was global. It's not that big a deal. We're just going to do... wait, it must be local. No, wait. Oh, I'm just an idiot. So the problem here is that I have randomized rotation turned on and not randomized spin. Yeah, you got to remember to actually set things up once you've programmed them, or you'll feel pretty bad. Let's also change the color to green because this is seaweed, right? So, all right. So let's fire. Okay, so it's they are 100% rotated upside down. Now that's technically a problem with the seaweed itself, so I guess we might as well fix it. What happened? No, just open up the seaweed. This is Unity's new prefab setup. Yeah, so here's the issue. It's just upside down. So we're just going to rotate it, and then we can apply the rotation, and you can see that it goes kind of off the wall. That's fine. There you go. All done. So that should fix it. Woo! So what I've done is I've changed the axes on the object, and that means the shader is now broken. Ob says, should you upgrade to Unity 2019 LTS? So the LTS version of Unity does have some things with it that I'm not a big fan of, but none of them are worth avoiding it for, and once you get here, it should be stable for quite a while. The 2019 LTS version is the last version of Unity I'm getting. Presumably there will be minor LTS upgrades, but I'm never going to bother with any other versions of Unity because I'm not going to be doing Unity for that much longer. This is the last major project, I think. So right now the problem here is that we are just on the wrong axes. I rotated an axis by 90 degrees. I think I went from Z to Y. To be honest, yeah, I went from Y to Z. To be honest, this is wrong. We're going to go ahead and fix it because I want it to be right. So let's go ahead and see whether that feels right. I don't think we need to change it in here. I think we need to get it right in Unity space. Why are these all still upside down? I flipped them, didn't I? Well, we'll delete them and try one more time. Ob says, will you use Godot? No, I'm probably just going to use Unreal. I'm not ever going to make enough money that Epic is going to make any money from me, so it's not a big deal. But I do have extremely serious problems with Epic, but since they are not charging any money, I don't care. That looks right. Let's go ahead and just double check and make sure it's right. Okay, so I still have the other particle set up. Well, let's go ahead and delete it. If I can find it. There it is. So here's our seaweed planter, and we're just going to delete it. Boom, gone. And just take a quick little look here. This seaweed is considerably thicker because it's fewer vertical elements. There's a lot of things I can do. I can make it more vertical elements. It doesn't seem to be moving much, does it? Oh, I guess it is. It was just really slow to get started. Oh, that's because I'm using time plus a sine wave, so the time doesn't start. Yeah. So we're going to want to actually fix that. I don't mind Godot. It's just that it has all the same problems that Unity has, so I'm not sure why I would. It doesn't have all of them. It's using a Unity-like approach, so it feels like I should just switch up to something a little bit heavier. Where's our time? There's our time. Basically, what we're going to do is just add a value. That way, it won't start at 0. Let's fire again. Let's save this as a prefab. Boom. One of the nice things about this is it's super easy to move them around. Let's take a look. Yeah, so you can see how heavy this is in comparison because the stalks are so much bigger. I could shrink them because they are super huge right now. The problem is that these are... oh, that is the surface. Okay, so I could actually just make them smaller. Let's go ahead and reduce the size. It's just a little too big. And then we'll just override that. And we can just go in here and shrink these manually. No big deal. It's okay if some of them don't reach the surface. They're not intended to be uniform. That's a little bit more like it. All right. So the other issue we've got is that we're starting in a place where we can't see the current because the current is pointed in a specific way. We're going to be starting back here because this is where the boat spawns in. So what we're going to want to do is make the current go along an axis across us, which means the x-axis. This is the x-axis of the world. So if we select this and we come down here, you can see that there is, in fact, an x-axis drift. It doesn't seem to do much, does it? Let's go ahead and punch it up, just see what's going on there. It might be that when I added a number, it didn't really... Is it broken? I just don't see these things coiling as much as they should be. Easy enough to check. We'll just change the wobble speed. You can see how nothing is happening. Nothing at all. That's not right. Ooh. So there's something wrong here. Just take a quick little look at one of these. So you can see that the spinning is clear, but what we want is for them to wobble in the breeze. And you can see that I can't seem to get them to do that, which means I must have broken it. It's not a very complicated setup, though, so I'm not sure how I broke it. So the only thing I did is I added 5 to it. I guess we could just start with a cosine instead of a sine. They're not moving. It's like they're frozen. That's weird because it was working when I shut it down yesterday. Now the spin is a little distracting, so what we're going to do is we're going to take the spin scale down to 0. Now it's not spinning anymore, and we can see how straight these are. There's no wobbling happening. So the wobble should multiply by the current. Okay, you can see that. Look there. See that? So what we've actually got going on here is somehow we've inverted... Oh, we inverted the y-axis. Of course, I'm just an idiot. So basically what I did is I made it so that they wouldn't... There's a hold fast at the bottom of each of these. And I made it so that they wouldn't wave in the breeze near the hold fast. But the result is that since I flipped the y-axis value on its butt, we're actually ending up with a limiter that is inverted, and it's counting the whole thing as a hold fast. And that's not too bad. We'll just flip this around and call it a day. Oh, it's not -10 anymore, is it? It's 0 to 10. I'm actually not sure. I might have inverted it twice just now, in which case it's not really any use, is it? Okay, so now you can see that they're wobbling. I've amped up the current just immensely on purpose to try and test it. It's obviously too much current. Just bring that down to something more like that. And let's just see how it looks. Oh, the wobble speed is set to 25. They're going to flail. Woohoo! It's disco time! That's obviously incorrect. And the turbulence is a little bit high. Let's try it. And then we'll reintroduce this spin because I took the spin away to test some stuff. The problem is it's not really on an axis that is making a clear difference to me here. Okay, so that is in fact the z-axis, not the x-axis. That's fine. There. So That's starting to work okay. Let's go ahead and close this down, put this back at 30, and what we'll do is just move some of these because they're kind of in the way. I want a clear visual all the way to this thing, just to give the player a really obvious initial interest point. It's not a big deal. Just grab these and move them. Only issue is that if the ground is at a different height, they might either be floating or dropped into the ground. You can see here, it dropped into the ground pretty badly. It might actually be better just to delete them, because it's not like they're difficult to create. There we are. Let's see how that looks. Yeah, so you can see the object over there. See it? Pretty easy. We'll be changing the visual a little bit, but over there you can see some other points of interest, and I don't want that. So what we're going to do is we're going to find that cannon, and we're just going to drop more clutter so that you don't go off to the sides when you should be focused on your main objective right now, because this is like a sensor area. You can go explore over there if you'd like. I just don't want it to be your first instinct. No, it needs to be just a touch heavier. Yeah, more like that. Now the other problem I've got is this rock. This rock has been here for quite a while, but I'm beginning to think it might just be in the wrong place. I don't know. Maybe if you start near the surface, it's not. Yeah, if you start above the rock, it's not that big a deal. If you start down near the ground, the rock is not a good place. One of the things that I really hate is there's this strobing. Can you see that strobing on the left? As far as I can tell, that's a bloom malfunction. So I'm going to have to try and figure out what's causing that and how to fix it. But it seems to be the bloom. The other thing that was taking a lot of extra time was getting these fish to work properly, because I had to pass them the time manually every frame. Turns out there's actually an argument you can just specify and pass them the time that way. You don't have to do it manually. But I haven't set it back up yet, so the fish are a little bit static. It's fine. We're not in a hurry. There's a lot of other things that I want to do. I've now damaged this area because there's supposed to be more stuff in it and a whole bunch of values like that. We also have to delete the fog cards that we were using. So let's go ahead and bring that seaweed cannon over and pollute us some backdrops. Let's just scale it up. Now I believe that the firing mechanism is a square, not a circle. If it's a circle, we're going to end up really, really heavily, densely populated right in the middle, which I don't want. Of course, I can always manually delete stuff. So the only issue here is that these are directly in the way of the current, and it won't be convincing if the current is blowing across them and they're not really responding. So I could put in some more that are set up specifically to look like they're blowing in a heavy current, but I haven't done that yet. So I'm actually not sure how this kind of plant works when there's a heavy current, because as far as I know, they don't let heavy currents happen. They basically strangle the currents, but I'm not 100% sure of that. We can now see substantially further than we could in previous iterations of this game, which is both a blessing and a problem. The problem being that I have to decorate much more aggressively. So over here, for example, we've got this wall that is really clearly not ready for prime time. So we're going to go ahead and work on some of this stuff, just do some level curation here. So if we select this, we should be able to revamp this corner a little bit. I want this to be a sand trickle, and so over here this is going to be rocks. We could use set height, that's fine, but the brush is much too big. So if I select a height like here, shift click, I should be able to, it's a little bit too weak, create like little shelf type. Like that, yeah. And then what we can do is paint them as a rock. Let's just go ahead and do a little bit more work here and there. And just rock. Let's change the selection view because it is a little bit bad. There we go. So here you can see we've got some rocks going up the side, but they're not very convincing. We're going to go ahead and just reshape this a little bit. And this is more or less how I want it, but we're going to want to put in like a scoop. So let's switch back over into set height and create a little bit of a scoop. There we are. Let's shrink this brush down rather considerably and do a little bit of detail. There we go. So I played the new Shipbreakers game, which I think was a great idea. It's in early access, which is a shame because the tutorial didn't work. It just didn't work, and I had to basically skip the tutorial and just try free play mode. And turns out free play mode isn't really that great. So then I took career mode and said skip tutorial. And then it turns out career mode is pretty fun, at least for the first couple of hours. So if you're not sure whether or not you want to try the new Hard Space Fleet Breaker or Shipbreaker, it's sort of like if you've ever played sorry, I'm blanking on the name all of a sudden. Viscera Cleanup Detail. If you ever played Viscera Cleanup Detail and you sort of enjoyed it, but it was a little too slow, then this is probably a game you'll like because it's maybe 15% faster. But it's got a lot of the same Viscera Cleanup Detail feel. I don't think that they intended it to be that way, but it's sort of that kind of game. And basically, you just cut ships apart. Spaceships. You break them apart and recycle them. And the reason I'm bringing it up is because they have a really neat aesthetic. And I'm not talking about the rockabilly soundtrack or whatever. I'm talking about the visuals of the spaceship. Because you've got to be able to cut the spaceships apart, you can see the bones of the spaceship, and you can access the bones of the spaceship from inside the spaceship. And there's space between the interior hallways and the outer hull. It's just a really fun aesthetic because you can look and see the bones of this ship you're breaking apart, and it's really pretty great. And the reason that I liked it enough that I just kept playing just to see more of that, and it's kind of a shame because it breaks down in the end. It doesn't end up looking for the largest category of ship that they've released right now. The interior space is just halls. It's just boxes. They're not properly arranged in like a constructive format so that it feels like, you know, you're disassembling a ship. It's just a bunch of boxes, and you have to choose where to cut the boxes in half, and it's not terribly compelling. But for the parts that that I do like, the earlier ships, it's an aesthetic that I'm thinking about stealing almost wholesale, because the it's so visually striking to have these industrial ships. I always do ships that are that have an interior that is engineering capable, but I don't generally do one where I think about how would you break the ship apart in order to like get at the sections that are inside the hull. And it turns out there's a lot to say and do if you think like that. So I may work on that some more. For me, the idea here, the nice piece that I want, is the idea that the inner hallways, well, all the hallways, but the inner hallways in specific, are they are, how do you say it? They are not just welded together boxes. They're not a box frame. They do form a box that's sealed properly, but what we've got when we're looking at them is a whole bunch of plates that are stapled to some kind of bone. They're stapled to a metallic structure using really, really heavy bolts. And I think that that's really cool, because if you think about what you're trying to build, a spaceship is going to have a box shape, and that means you're going to have bones on the bottom, the top, and on the sides in order to properly frame and mount your interior plates. And that means that there's a lot of cool things that you can do. You're not just creating a single spine, you're not just creating one spine and stapling everything to that single spine. You have to create sort of a split situation where you've got a bunch of side elements that prop up the side plates. And if you wanted to, you could put those on the inside of the hull. They don't have to be on the outside. So therefore, if you wanted to have your industrial look and you didn't want to worry too much about, space between the inner hull and the outer hull, you could just run heavy plates along the inner hull on the inside of the hallways, where people are walking around. And I think that is a pretty neat idea. It offers a lot more variation than the ways I was handling it before. So what I'm doing now is I'm deleting the fog cards. They're truly ancient, and I don't think we need them. I put them in because they were in another game that I really respect, but I don't think we need them. Just delete them. We're also going to have to fix the fog setters. We don't really have the right fog shader anymore. We changed it. Good job, Unity. I accidentally hit Shift Space and you broke. Fucking hell. Alright, well, let's pop you up with Phoenix Wright while I try and figure out what the fuck to do about Unity just randomly breaking when you hit Shift Space. Now, I've been using software for quite a while. IDEs of all shapes and sizes for as long as most people who are watching me have been alive. And I've complained about all of them, but Unity has a special place in my heart for things like Shift Space crashing it. Now, in Blender, if you accidentally hit Shift Space, it might, delete everything in the scene and be undoable. But at least you'll still be able to see the scene. Blender's hotkeys are truly opaque, and they cannot be undone, and they aren't logged. Oh, fucking hell. Are you kidding me? It's still broken? Well, I guess, welcome back to my Unity stream. I think what I'm going to have to do is see if I can reset to default. Window, layouts, revert factory settings. Yeah. So I was very, very close to factory settings anyway. It doesn't really matter. All right. So it's all fixed. So what's our next step? Well, there are lots of things that we need to do in order to get this to really pop. One of the things that I have been doing is, thanks Unity. One of the things I've been doing is I've been going very, very fast. The character kind of moves super, super fast. And that's just because I'm debugging. I actually don't want the character to move that fast in the actual game. So I'm thinking about lowering the speed of the character rather dramatically. And that should just be something I can just do. Side speed, forward speed, here it is. So here you can see the forward speed goes between 0 and it looks like 7. I'm going to drop that to 6. We'll just lower it a little bit in general. I played a diving game, the newest one. I forget what it's called. It was about 2 hours long. It was pretty fun. But it had this really artificial look to it. This same artificial look you can see right here. When I'm looking straight ahead, you can see that crisp edge between the rock and the dirt. Now, putting aside whether or not that gives away the fact that it's a mesh, it gives away the fact that you're not underwater, because there is no water that is that clear. So what we really need to do is put in a lot of just silt. There needs to be the ability for me to paint in silt in all the places where two meshes overlap. But I don't really know how to do that. Is there a Unity call to see whether two colliders overlap? The problem is that one of those colliders is a terrain element. I could also try and do it manually, but I would need a lot of them. And another option is I could try to do a shader effect where when you're close to the ground, the shader changes what it's drawing. And I could just make it draw sand or whatever. But the shader effect would need to understand what texture it's sitting on and a lot of other details like that. Now these are perfectly square little boxes, aren't they? That is an old effect that hasn't really held up very much. Why don't I see whether I can turn this old effect into something that suits my needs for what we're looking at now. So you can't see them here because they are not spawned in just yet. If I'm not mistaken, it should be here in Terrain 1, or Room 1. There's the mesh sprayer. Particle effects, grass cannon, silt clouds, flat planter, fish bolus, fish. I don't actually know what it is. It's something I put together without a proper drawer, which is a little strange. So it's right here. You can see it directly beneath me here. Why does clicking on the screen do that? That was very weird. So I don't see anything here. Oh good, we actually already specified a sound. So here's the particles that that we're sort of trying to get to make a little bit of a mess. We're going to go ahead and add in some larger silt effects, see whether we can make that work. I really want to know what this is. I stupidly didn't name it. Now, in all honesty, this is a test level. I mean, it's theoretically the first level, but if I had to completely recreate it near the end of the project, I wouldn't be surprised. So I'm not too concerned that I can't figure out what this is. It's clearly a particle effect, but I don't know which one. Morning plane, loop cannon, load triggers, scree cannon. There it is. So here it is. It's the scree cannon, which is a particle editor script. And the particle editor has the same problem that our particle cannon did. It doesn't have an onDraw gizmos. It does. No, this is particle editor onDraw. Yeah, onDraw gizmos. So why couldn't I see this? The fuck? Oh, 0.01. That's pretty low. I don't think it's drawing. I think that this is... Oh, there it is. Okay. There we are. Now that I can select that, it should be fine. So let's go and... The problem is these particles... These particles are no good. It's very, very hard for me to... I could use a UV map. Let's see whether I can adapt these particles. I can't remember whether I was about to do something else or not because of my lack of caffeine, but it's worth just taking a look. We got this scree here. Right now we're rendering onto a billboard, which should have a flat UV map, 0 to 1. We should be able to use that to reduce the scree pattern near the edges and give us a circular blob rather than a square one, because the square ones are really obvious. So here we've got two versions of noise, and we bring them together with a max function. And the two noise versions just loop between the two textures. They loop between two textures. So all we really need to do is reduce the noise value here, reduce the opacity max specifically, based on the UV value. So we're going to go ahead and find that texture UV. Here it is. And we're going to remap both of these. It was from 0 to 1. We're going to make it from -1 to 1. And then we are going to clamp it. Oh, sorry. Then we're going to absolute value it. And that'll give us a value between 0 and 1, but we need to do a 1 minus. There we are. And the truth is this is going to give us more of a diamond shape, but we'll go ahead and use a power function. But we'll want to use the power function first. Oop. And then we do a max. Max? Do we do a max or do we multiply them? I think we might multiply them. And if we're going to multiply them, we might as well multiply them all. Let's just see how this looks. All right, so you can see that they are now much less square. They are now much rounder. But when they fade out, they sort of fade out in a kind of a slightly strange way. I might polish that later. I might give them a different look. Like maybe I'll use an alpha mask instead of this, because then I can create like hooks and stuff rather than just circular blobs. But this should work. So now that we've got that scree shader, we could theoretically use it in a lot of different locations, but the first thing I want to do is add in more silt. So if we look here in the scree cannon, this goes into the particle effects because it's a particle effect. And then also into the particle effects, we will drop in everybody's favorite silt. Floating particles, flat. So we've actually got a seaweed planter, but this is the old one that uses the particle system, so it's gone. And then over here, I'm just trying to figure out which of these I actually use. And I believe this silt cloud is correct, but it's also kind of garbagey. That should be fine, though. We'll just move it up. And basically, we would like it to cover the rocks like this. But the problem is, I don't believe that the color is right. Might be a little high. Let's see how it looks. I think that this particular silt color is a little too dark. We'll just have to change the start color if that's the case. So I'm just trying to see if I can break this up with silt, but I gotta ask you, do you see the silt yet? It's actually quite hard to see. The problem is this silt cloud was never intended to be viewed up close. It actually disappears when the camera gets close. I think we need a new silt shader that can be used up close. It's going to be very similar to the particle effects that you see floating in the air around us. Problem is, each of those is a particle, which is super friggin' expensive, right? So what we really need is a proxy, which is why we built this over here. So the idea here is that we might be able to take the elements that we were using here, which is the scree shader. We might be able to use that to create a second category of particles. So that's what we're going to work on right now. Where did I put the... I thought I dropped it into the particle effects category, but apparently I didn't. I dropped it into this. It's fine. So here's our silt cloud, and what we're going to do is we're going to replace this with a shader that is more in tune with what we want. Over here in the materials section, let's just close this down. We should have particles set up. There it is, scree. It's here because I didn't have the particles section at the time. So we've got this scree object. We're going to want to duplicate it, create ourselves a new material, which we're going to call blobby silt. So when we come over here into the silt cloud, which should go into particle effects, not inside of a particle effect, just in general here. Is it just me, or is it like moving? Is that a different silt cloud? Because that doesn't seem like it's in the same spot as the one I was using. Oh, there's the one I was using. Jesus. Unity really just drops that shit wherever the fuck it wants. It doesn't seem to care much at all. So here's our new silk cloud, and we're going to drop in that new material, which we called blobby silt. We have to open the render, try again here. And if we take a look at how this might appear, we want to be able to see it. And can you see it? It's very, very faint. Let's go ahead and tweak it. Oh, there's no... Yeah, this is right. I don't think it needed any other vertex streams. Let's just take a quick little look here. Stable X. Okay, so it wants a stable X. I'm just kind of playing around here because I don't remember exactly what's going on. You can see that we've got these dots in the middle. That's clearly the effect of our edge avoidance. So our edge avoidance is a little bit too aggressive. Multiplying them together is apparently not quite stingy enough. What we're going to do is just raise the power on those. That should push them more towards the edges. I don't want to lose so much of the space. Yeah, that's a little better. Still not great, but for now it's fine. We can oh, you know what we can do? Since we're clamping, we are not clamping. Basically, we can remap 0 to 1 turns into negative 1 to 1, but we can make that I don't know. We'll think about it later. This should work without any textures. I'm not sure why it's doing the thing it's doing here. We'll just choose some textures arbitrarily here. It's definitely not doing what I expected it to do. If we take a look at the scree cannon, the material here has a noise min of negative 0.04. Oh, the noise scale is probably just terrible because I didn't clone properly. I just made a new material. Yeah, look, it's a 0. I'll make this like 2.2, 2.2, 2.2. And make this like 4.4. Oh, no, 4.1, 4.1, 4.1. Still not enough, so we'll make this like 9.1, 9.1, 9.1. And basically I'm just trying to make it so that they're small. 12.6, 12.6, and don't overlap. There we are. So you can now see that there's like this super dense pattern. There's like lots of ghosts being shown behind, so I'll just turn around so we can see it a little bit clearer. See that? That's how it looks. The noise min is very high. If we were to change that like this, we now have a bunch of floating particles. And now the only issue here is that these floating particles are camera tracking. Now the reason that's an issue is because it becomes very obvious when you're close to something like this, when they turn towards the camera all the time. See how that's pretty awful? It's not necessarily awful if it's at the right height, but these are floating in the air, so they're really clearly not at the right height. And also when I turn, they vibrate. And the reason for that is because they are in world space. So when they rotate, they get a different world space coordinate. And that's why when you're doing the screen tracking stuff, world space is not the best way to do it. That's why this particular shader kind of assumed that these things were never going to move. They were always going to be pointed straight up. That's why it's called scree. We may have to duplicate the scree shader and make it a local position instead. Well, no, because it doesn't understand the concept of local positions. Particles don't have a concept of local position. We could use UV coordinate. Let's go ahead and try that. So basically, going to duplicate this scree shader. We'll call it floating motes. Where'd it go? I looked away for a second and it moved it. How dare you alphabetically sort stuff? Open in shader editor? The fuck? That's not right. Oh, it is right. This must be something that happened recently, because previously there was a big button and then there were two small buttons. And open in shader editor was the big button on top, and then there was another option to open it in a different setup, and I guess they finally decided that was pretty crappy. So this is what it looks like right now. This is going to be our floating particles that I call it. I called it floating motes. No, that's not how you spell anything. That's not it either. I think we can't put a space in. I don't remember. All right. So all we're going to do is replace the world coordinates for this guy here. Now we have been using a 3-dimensional noise. We'll be using a 2-dimensional noise. No, that's too many pieces. I guess we'll just duplicate it, bring it down to float 2. This is going to be a float 2 as well. It's a vector 3. I guess I can't change the type to a vector 2. Just delete it and start over. It's going to need to be more than that. So this is just an offset that we scroll on the W here so that they're all unique. And so we don't need to worry about that, but this should be a vector 3, a vector 2 rather. So we'll just bring that in as well. And that should be the same basic setup, but now using UV coordinates. So all we need to do is make it so that that is the thing that the material in question uses. Move. Get out of the way. There. Let's rename this floating motes. And this is going to use our floating motes. Oh good, we got fishy swimmy and fishy space swimmy. Brilliant. Well, both of those are going to go eventually. No big deal. So, where are we? What? There we go. Yeah. So let's see whether or not this is a little bit less jarring. The problem is, as they rotate to face the camera, it's probably going to be pretty obvious that they are not actually in the water. They're just kind of artificially projected onto the screen. So we're probably going to have to use a world space coordinate that doesn't rotate, in which case I just wasted my time, but that's fine. Yeah, so here you can see that as we move, that's not too bad, but they sort of move in a weird way. See that? And also they appear and disappear. We're going to want to add in an alpha value based on the time, based on just the alpha settings. So if we come over here into our alpha over lifetime, you can see that the alpha does go away. I think the problem here is that we're not using it. Let's take a look. Here we are. So vertex color is that. And you can see the vertex color is in use. 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9 10 11 12 13 14 15 16 17 18 19 20 21 22 23 24 25 26 27 28 29 30 31 32 33 34 35 36 37 38 39 40 41 42 43 44 45 46 47 48 49 50 51 52 53 54 55 56 57 58 59 60 61 62 63 64 65 66 67 68 69 70 71 72 73 74 75 76 77 78 79 80 81 82 83 84 85 86 87 88 89 90 91 92 93 94 95 96 97 98 99 100 101 102 103 104 105 106 107 108 109 110 111 112 113 114 115 116 117 118 119 120 121 122 123 124 125 126 127 128 129 130 131 132 133 134 135 136 137 138 139 140 141 142 143 144 145 146 147 148 149 150 151 152 153 154 155 156 Nowhere. There is no vertex color, so we're just going to introduce it. The only thing we really care about is opacity, though. That's append. That's not vertex color. There we are. Now they should properly fade in and out over time. The other thing that I'm not a big fan of is they were a little bit too blobular. Oh, you know what? There you are. You see how we've got some that aren't quite what I would consider a good shape. I think what I want to do is create an overlapping setup that can go above 0 rather than the one we've got right now, or above 1 rather. Right now what I do is I take the two noises and I take the maximum value of the noise. And I think what I actually want to do for this is add the two noises together. And I didn't actually change both noises anyway. All right, so there's some other values that we need to work with here. So here is our first setup. Here's our second setup. Delete this guy. No, I mean just delete the whole thing, thanks. We don't need any textures. Edge color? No, don't need that. I mean, we could use it, but we're not going to. All we need is the vertex color. For our albedo. We're simplifying right now. There we go. So we got one noise at the moment, and the idea here is that we don't want. There we are. We don't want one noise. I'll show you why. I'll hit save here, and we'll take a look at it. When you only have one noise value, the results are very, very basic, but it might be that basic is what we want. Is this a lit shader? Oh, it's a lit shader. That's going to give us issues. If it's a lit shader, we should override the vertex normal to just be up. I'll just do that off screen here. Save it. All right. So the reason they just changed color is because now they're pointing at the sky. And if we adjust the clip value or the noise min, we should get smaller dots like that. That might be enough. That might be good enough for our needs. Let's go ahead and take a look. Now, we can change the color really easily, so I'm not too concerned about that. But we are still doing pointing at the camera for these motes. And the question is whether or not that works. These are very sparkly motes. You can see that when they're far from the camera, they introduce some sparkling. Oh, this is completely fine. This is perfectly convincing. Oh, except when they're at the very edge of the screen, they start to do some weird stuff right at the very end. No, it's not quite working, but I think I need to change how it works. Let me think about it for a while. That's not done. There's a lot of stuff that I need to do that is still in play. But one of the other things worth mentioning is we've got this sand fill. This is a very relatively cheap sand fill, which should allow us to Yeah, should allow us to just put in like arbitrary spotty elements that will hopefully hide some of our edges. But the thing is, the sand fill is shaped like a saddle. Just the nature of the object we're using. And that makes it a little bit hard to use in spaces like this. But I suppose we could just shrink it down and use 2 of them. Wow, the saddle is the exact wrong shape. But that's not necessarily a terrible idea. We'll just open it up. So here's the saddle shape that we were using. Is it this one? That's terrain bowl small. It's terrain bowl layered. We're going to duplicate this, move it off to the side a little bit here, and call it terrain hill small layered. And we're just going to go in here and invert it. Oh, there we are. Nope. Maybe instead of inverting it, what I need to do is move it up. Oh, this is an old file. Ugh. You know what? I think I'll just do it manually. There, now it's a hill. Now if we come back over here, we should be able to switch this out. There we are. And now that it's shaped a little bit more in tune with what we need, we shouldn't have quite such a hard time making it fit into this area. I'm trying to figure out. This is why I prefer particles, because they just kind of work. You don't have to try and move things 100 million times until they finally work. But this is something that a terrain shader should ideally be able to do. Let's just see whether or not that half-assed setup is convincing. Yeah, see that fill under there? It may not feel like much. I think the shape is still wrong. I mean, it's definitely better, but it's not good. The thing is, that could almost be done by terrain if I went with a higher density of terrain. Right now it's about 1 point per foot or so. If I doubled or tripled that, then I could do this with terrain rather than with fill elements. But what I really want to do is do it with particles. I just don't know how yet. Well, we will discuss that some other time. Right now I'm just trying to get used to the fact that I can see so much further. It's really changing what I think of how this looks. I think I'm going to need to have a retaining wall around our hab that cuts across back here. And we could sort of claim it's there because of the current or something. But we need to focus people on the hab, not on the view that they've got over here. I could put in a couple of these bad boys. I could move them over just to partially hide stuff, you know, make it so it's a little bit less distracting, but it's never going to be great. All right, well, I have to think about it some more. I'm going to stop now. Unless anybody has any pressing questions, I'll give it like 10 or 15 more seconds. But I don't think I know what I want yet. So I think we're going to... Did I move that on top of the hab? How did I do that? Wow, that's what you get for dragging things around at random. Anyway, I don't think I know what I want visually speaking. I've got to do some more thinking or whatever. I just want to see if that breaks up the view a little bit. Actually, it does. It's just it's not tall enough. You can see how short it is. To be honest, I should probably just make these a larger, you know, a longer chain. I just don't want them to be heavy. Yeah, that actually does help quite a bit. If I add a retaining wall, then it should be really clear that you're supposed to go to the hab. Yeah, I was kind of making fun of the sand fill. It doesn't look bad though. It just needs to be polished a little bit. We're gonna have to do a lot of stuff, but that's the thing. It can be done piecemeal. I just have to start making it into a game at some point with levels, and then we can just keep working away at it until we get sick of it and throw it out a window. All right, thanks for stopping by, everybody. I will see you later.